Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, September 19th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about the 2024 United States Senate election in the state of California, a very important race for progressive Democrats across the country as they fight for the possibility of serving in the U.S. Senate from the state of California following the retirement of Dianne Feinstein, who has served in the U.S. Senate for quite some time now. Now, the 2024 race here is not a competitive one in the sense of a general election. The state of California is overwhelmingly blue, and in the past few elections, we have seen Democrats run up the margins quite significantly. In 2022, Democrats won by 22 points. In 2018, it was 2 Democrats on the ballot. In 2016, it was 2 Democrats on the ballot. You get the idea. California isn't competitive that way. But in the Democratic primary, it absolutely is. Because this is a state where the primary practically determines the general election, many Democrats have filed to run for this Senate race, given that it very infrequently opens up as a possibility. Now, of those who have declared are some very recognizable names, but none more important than Barbara Lee, Katie Porter, and Adam Schiff. All 3 U.S. representatives from different regions of the state representing different congressional districts with some very interesting dynamics happening between them all. Now, the reason why we're making this video isn't just because the Senate race in California is interesting, but because a plot twist that just came in as Gavin Newsom announces that he will not be appointing Representative Barbara Lee for the Senate race, the Senate seat in the state of California, saying that he would appoint instead a caretaker, somebody who would not run for the regular election, but would just instead hold the seat if this was a possibility. However, there is no indication that there is going to be a vacancy immediately unless, there is something that we aren't expecting when it comes down to California politics and unexpected resignation. That is maybe within the realm of possibility. But this is a hypothetical question that has stirred a lot of controversy, a lot of questions, and a lot of considerations around whether or not Gavin Newsom is actually following through on the promise that he made back in April to appoint a black woman as senator. Now, a lot of Republicans are up in arms about this promise to appoint a black woman in the first place. First, all to say that California did not have a black senator until Kamala Harris came along the line. She ran for attorney general in 2010, reelected in 2014, ran for Senate in 2016, and then, of course, became vice president, thus leaving her seat early. Then Gavin Newsom made history by appointing the first Latino senator, who then served on to win a full term in 2022. Now will be in the Senate till at least 2028. So with the vacancy of Kamala Harris, black women across the country were left without representation in the United States Senate. I mean, there is no other black women in the United States Senate as of right now. So looking at that, understanding the dynamics that come from California as a state that has a very, very expansive minority population, Gavin Newsom recognized that and said, you know what, I will appoint a black woman as senator. And everyone expected it to be Barbara Lee. Every single person for a while expected it to be Barbara Lee, but then he came out with this new news. Like I said, it was a change for everyone, including Barbara Lee, who has come out and said, you know what, I'm troubled by this conversation. I'm troubled of this talk of an interim senator. Whoever should be here should serve out their full term, and he should follow through on the promises that he made. Now, this is obviously still a campaign tactic. Barbara Lee is, in fact, running for U.S. Senate and very much does benefit by being appointed as the interim senator. It would up her name recognition immediately. She would become the de facto incumbent, and there would be a lot of benefits of her being appointed to the U.S. Senate, especially as the polling numbers seem to indicate that her chances are dwindling at winning the race here. Now, California is interesting, though. These primaries can't be pulled in the same way you might think. You know, when you're looking at California Senate open primary, everyone's running together, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, and there's still an overwhelming majority or considerable plurality of voters across the state that are undecided as to how they're going to go. You're talking about roughly 30% of the state is on the fence, and no candidate is above 20% in a singular poll that we have seen since the beginning of this primary season. But with Gavin Newsom, again, with this newfound revelation from the California governor, there's a lot of questions. Does Barbara Lee make it far enough to actually be in this race? Now, you might have remembered that I mentioned how Democrats were running against each other. That's because, again, California has an open primary system, which means everybody's running together, and the top 2 contenders end up on the final ballot. So when we're looking at the Senate races, for example, in 2016, Kamala Harris was on the ballot. She ran against Loretta Sanchez. She was the Democratic nominee, and so was she. Both of them were running as Democrats because they were in the top 2. As a result, Republicans did not get their own representation. Kamala Harris was running against another Democrat. The party control was not going to change. The same thing happened in 2018 with Dianne Feinstein when the California Democratic Party endorsed Kevin De Leon. He went on to be about 10 points within 8 points of Dianne Feinstein, ended up losing the race, but now there's a retirement here. Interesting that he decided against running again. Regardless, though, you are seeing about an 8-point difference in that last election, but again, between Democrats. So we know that the race itself isn't going to be competitive on the basis of general election politics. Republicans and Democrats are not going to be the ones that are going to be fighting out this race. It is all handled on the Democratic side, but in this open primary. But Barbara Lee is at an unfortunate position. Sorry about that. My Siri went off for some reason. She's at an unfortunate position in the sense that she is polling in the most recent number from the LA Times and UC Berkeley at just 7%. Pretty consistently, in every single poll that has been released, she has been losing in third, sometimes fourth place across the state. That's not where you want to be as someone who is supposed to be a top-tier candidate who has been endorsed by quite a substantial amount of people. The interesting thing about California's primary, too, is that of the members in Congress, they are all backing either Adam Schiff or Barbara Lee, with very few going to Katie Porter, and yet somehow Katie Porter, as the most recent U.S. representative who has made one of the biggest names for herself, first elected in 2018. Isn't it crazy to think about 5 years later, she's in the top two to become U.S. Senator against someone who's been in the House since 2001, against people who have been in the House since 1998. This is quite substantial. It's very, very victorious for Katie Porter, especially given that she doesn't have many endorsements. We can take a look, too. I think it's very interesting to see in terms of who people want to work with, in terms of who people trust, in terms of where the coalitions are being built. Katie Porter, Barbara Lee are both considered to be progressive by many progressives across the U.S. Adam Schiff, not as much, but not necessarily a Kyrsten Sinema, not necessarily a Joe Manchin, not necessarily a centrist Democrat by many people's standard. But Barbara Lee received so many endorsements. You can see here that she's received the endorsements from members all across the state of California in congressional and in House districts, in Senate districts, in the California Assembly, right? You have people in municipal elections, mayors in California, multiple U.S. representatives, a number of statewide officials, both within California, incumbent attorney generals, secretaries of state, outside, board of education members, state treasurers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You go down and see Adam Schiff, very similar. A lot of endorsements all across the state of California, numerous state senators, numerous state representatives, assemblymen is what they call them, a bunch of local officials, numerous labor unions. It's overwhelming. It's a lot coming at you. And then you see Katie Porter. And you start to ask, okay, she got a co-endorsement with the California Attorney General, who also endorsed Barbara Lee. She got Elizabeth Warren. Okay, but she's 3,000 miles away in Massachusetts. Then you look 2 state senators, 3 state assemblymen, just a few local officials, some individuals, 2 labor unions, an organization that endorsed them all, and then the Democrats of Greater Irvine. I question this not to say that these organizations are not well respected or these people are not good people or, good in the sake of electability. I just see a stark contrast here. Katie Porter very clearly does not have as many connections as the people who have been in Congress since 98 and 2001. Wow, what a surprise, right? But it's more than that. It's more than just they've been in as institutional politicians, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I don't think that this is something that voters necessarily always care about. But Katie Porter is new. It shows. And yet somehow she is doing so well. So when Gavin Newsom put this really big bump in the road for Barbara Lee, it made it that much harder for her to win this race. Barbara Lee has been there for a while. Adam Schiff has been there for a while. Katie Porter, again, was elected in 2018 in the anti-Trump wave, made a name for herself in congressional hearings, her famous whiteboards, her famous diagrams, her famous demeanor towards these big pharma, spokespersons, towards people she's grilling. She's going for the man. And people rewarded that and are rewarding it right now. So Gavin Newsom is in this position. There's this conversation around Dianne Feinstein that also throws a bit of a bump in the road for him later down the line. Because let's say there is a possibility that Barbara Lee is elected to the U.S. Senate. Is she going to be the first to endorse him in a 2028 presidential race? I know it might seem interesting to be talking about this well in advance, but saying that she's troubled is saying very little compared to what I think she actually means to say. Barbara Lee, in many people's eyes, were meant to be the next U.S. Senator if Dianne Feinstein had to retire, if she chose to leave the U.S. Senate. Even then, that was something that Democrats, I think, on the Barbara Lee side, were widely expecting to happen as a strong possibility, as something that could resurge her campaign, and saying that he now doesn't want to meddle in the race. Even the Los Angeles Times, for an article in April of 2023, put her as the cover. Her and Gavin Newsom have a very good relationship. This conversation must have happened months in advance. And this commitment from Gavin Newsom isn't just a change to Barbara Lee. It's a change to everyone, as I've been saying. So in that event that maybe she is the U.S. Senator, I don't know how quickly she endorses him. What if Kamala Harris is in the race? What if Gretchen Whitmer is in the race? What if Josh Shapiro is in the race? These are all considerations that we need to have because they're important, and they also will help dictate future elections. The decisions made by politicians years, decades in advance prior to the presidential bids really do impact them. Gavin Newsom, I can imagine, is going to get slammed by many members of the left for not appointing Barbara Lee. But considering that right now she's hovering on average around 9-10% support in California, who knows how influential that vote share actually will be in the regular election. So looking at where we are for the 2024 Senate race, we know it's going to be a Democrat. I think that Katie Porter and Adam Schiff will ultimately end up in the top two. That's not good for Barbara Lee, but I think it makes sense, and everything has been moving away from her. From the very beginning, there were calls on her to drop out and to endorse someone like Katie Porter to prevent Adam Schiff from becoming the nominee. But the difference between the three also could just not be more apparent when it comes down to how they interact with other senators, other representatives, people in Congress, people in California. All of them seem to have different dynamics with their staffers, with their constituents, with other people, and that matters because this primary is, again, the regular election. This is what makes the difference. It's not the general, it's the primary. So the type of person you're sending to the U.S. Senate, as we saw with Dianne Feinstein, will likely be there for decades to come. One also concern for Barbara Lee is that some people think she's too old for the seat. She assumed office in 1998 in the U.S. House. She was born in 1946. She is 77 years old. Do people want to elect a one-term senator, a two-term senator at most, before people tend to retire from the U.S. Senate? Don't ask Chuck Grassley about that, but that's generally when we see it happening. Barbara Lee is 77. By comparison, Katie Porter is just 49. By comparison, Adam Schiff is just, and I say just because I know this is still up on the older side, 63 years old. That's a decade more to serve in the U.S. Senate than Barbara Lee probably would. People like to leave, at most at 90. Dianne Feinstein, in her age, has been a bunch of concerns raised about whether or not she should be in the U.S. Senate. She is 90 years old serving in the U.S. Senate. That is the major concern here for Democrats across California. And so when you look at Barbara Lee, they might see a future Dianne Feinstein in the making. Someone who is a champion for progressive politics, who has made a name for herself by being a visionary, but someone who inevitably will encounter that problem with age. It also doesn't help that the concerns being raised about President Biden's age will be coinciding with the same primary election. It doesn't help that the same presidential election will be coinciding with this 2024 race. And it especially doesn't help now that Gavin Newsom has said definitively that he would not choose Barbara Lee for the Senate race for the sole purpose of not meddling in this Senate election. People praised and criticized this decision all around, but it is clear there are people who are happy and unhappy with this decision, and I don't know how that impacts Gavin Newsom in the future. I don't know how it impacts his political future. But Barbara Lee's, this certainly was a detriment. That's why her own congressional office is saying that she's troubled by Gavin Newsom's talks, going on the offense. She didn't just go quietly into the night when it came down to this. She is actively fighting against this decision by Gavin Newsom, both publicly and I'm sure privately. But he probably isn't going to budge. Coming out with something as public as this, saying it's unfair, then walking it back, that's going to be tricky. It's going to be difficult, and I don't know if it's going to happen. But the 2024 race in California absolutely is a very fascinating race to watch. I would highly recommend that you all take time, watch the race, watch whatever debates end up, see how they're campaigning, because this is one of the very few elections where the primary serves as the general in a state that has so much impact, so many people, and we will see exactly how this ends up come November 2024. But earlier than that, when it comes down to this general primary, we'll see who ends up in the top two. Chances are it's two Democrats. My bets are on Katie Porter and Adam Schiff. Times can change, though. American politics can change and does change overnight. And that might happen in California. That might happen if Dianne Feinstein chooses to retire. But We will see. Right now, that doesn't seem to be within a direct indication of the next year. She'll probably serve out her full term, and the race will proceed as normal. And based off the numbers today, if I was Barbara Lee, unfortunately for her, I wouldn't be too hopeful. But Adam Schiff and Katie Porter seem to be in for a very competitive two-way race in the general election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist from my 2024 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.